Thanks everyone. Sorry for the truncated lunch, but wonderful to see you back here again for our forum this afternoon. So we've got some wonderful panellists. I'll introduce you to the panellists. Associate Professor Heather Alexander from Learning Futures. You've just met Professor Don Lebler from the Con. Professor Glenn Finger from AEL, lovely to see you. Professor Nick Barter from Griffith Online. Georgina Sanger from Griffith Sciences, Christopher Allen from Griffith Sciences, and Catherine Hodgson from GBS. So please make welcome the panellists for this afternoon. And when I invited the panellists, yes, Cecilia's reminding me that we've got a microphone for questions as well. So you were part of the discussions this afternoon. So it is not just the panellists answering questions, it is actually an interactive forum. So please make sure that you ask questions, and but we will definitely finish at 1 o'clock today because I know you've all got other appointments. So when I invited the panellists, I said we will be talking about contemporary issues and trends in assessment. And over the last few days, I've been talking to some colleagues about what are the kinds of questions that we'd be talking about in this session, and looking at the different literature about the contemporary trends. So these are the kinds of questions, well, the first one that I'm going to pose to the panel. We've got 3 questions today. So if we spend about 10 minutes on each, and then we'll open it up for a wider discussion about anything that's sort of, any burning issues that you have. So the very first one is reflecting on the developments in e-assessment. What do you think have been the most significant achievements and trends over the past few years? And I'd like to throw firstly to Professor Glenn Finger, see whether he can kick us off with a response to that question. Thanks, Glenn.
So by recent, the past few years, I'm talking about the last decade. So the last few years, I'm thinking about the last decade. And I think these have been absolutely significant within our university. And major work has been done on improving governance of assessment and academic achievement standards within our university. And we've been responding, I think, really well in terms of our achievements as we approach what I'd call network learning spaces. So the kinds of modus operandi of many academics, I think a decade ago, was the collection boxes in the hallways or wherever where students would come in at a certain time, you collect them up, you take them home, often in wheelbarrows or trolleys. You distribute them. There'd be a collection day, again, or collection days for them. But we've responded very well to that, and I have to speak with some credibility here, having been on assessment committees over the last decade, looking at governance across AEL Group, and enormous leaps forward in the way in which the policy has responded within our university from the top down, but also assessment boards have responded with feedback up. So Don's sitting beside me, I can recollect as we moved to my marks centre, it was actually the grades centre, but we were telling students these are not your grades, and grades are not approved. They're recommended by assessment board to the Dean Learning and Teaching. So there was feedback from the Conservatorium to change this to my marks centre. So there was the two-way flow of communication as we moved into these spaces. And as a person who's now teaching again back in the School of Education and Professional Studies, and convening the Griffith Education internship, wherever those interns are, they no longer have to race into the university. They can submit their internship action plans Friday evening of the first week, constructed in consultation with their mentor teachers and the school coordinator. I can provide inline marking, not online marking, but inline feedback, and get them back to them by Sunday evening, ready for Monday in their context again. So I think we've achieved a lot, and it's been a response, I think, to a significant change in our learners and academics and teachers working in networked learning space. I'll talk a bit more about that more as we look at future trends, because I think there's challenges and opportunities ahead of us as well.
Professor Barter, do you have anything?
You want that?
I guess I've always been challenged by the idea of e-assessment. And that's because when Glenn was talking about the history of development of e-assessment, if you like, within the university, I remember arriving in 2011 and actually remember Catherine Hodgson coming to see me, and she said, "You better get on Blackboard." And I was like, "What's that?" And then she said, "So you use this to get all your submissions and stuff." And I was like, "Okay." And so in that regard, being involved in these kind of network ability to deal with things on the computer has been my lived reality for since I've been in Griffith. So I don't feel I can answer the trends piece because it's just what I'm in the flow of, if that makes sense.
Catherine, would you like to? I'll throw to you.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm old enough to be able to talk about trends. And I was thinking about what Glenn said. So I remember the first time I used e-assessment, and it was in the 90s, but the students actually had to come on campus to use e-assessment. Sorry, it is on. So they had to come on campus. So because we didn't have an infrastructure, we didn't have broadband, very few of them had PCs at home. So we were doing e-assessment, but they were face-to-face when they did it. And I think if you look at, it's not just about the students that's changed, it's the environment that's changed as well. And the students are fitting into that new environment, and we've got to fit into that new environment. And now they don't need to come onto campus for e-assessment anymore, which is a huge difference.
Chris, have you seen anything in sciences?
I was just going to say that, to carry on what Catherine was saying, it's the types of assessment that I've seen that has been a significant change. And it's not so much the digital technology that may have made those changes, but the types of things people are looking for. So the fact that you do have that flexibility, the fact that you can have assessment going into a workplace, or you can have assessment completed by people at home, or the fact that you can have people from other sides of the world participating in assessment with people from here, and experts from all sorts of industries and other areas all being able to be part of that one assessment item, is where people have been able to envision different things from what they might have been forced to use in a previous assessment idea, because of what you've now been given as an opportunity, which both the assessment design and the technology is afforded for them.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone from the audience like to comment on the past trends?
Can we ask a question? It's also much past trends, but where are we at with the assessment when it comes to online exams, particularly final exams, and particularly for cohorts like OUA, so we can get rid of people actually having to come in and sit at the menu?
Heather, would you like to comment?
The e-assessment working group that I referred to before has just reviewed all of the online proctoring, which is just another word for invigilation. There's various companies across the world that provide online proctoring, and we are about to start a trial with one company this semester with Criterion, and I think once we have that in place, we can then rethink some of the policies around that area, like the limitation on non-invigilated online tests to 20% of the total grade can be reviewed once we can actually invigilate those tests and be sure about who's sitting it and that they're not using a lot of aids that they shouldn't have to sit the test.
Yeah, can I just to build on that? So Criterion are going to, basically you'll be sitting at home with your laptop and you need another camera other than the one that's built into the hood of your laptop so they can get a look at the room as well. There are some data issues here, obviously, in regards to encroaching in people's spaces and what does that mean. We're doing it in the Masters of Finance that is available online through the Alliance in the 6-week teaching periods. And we're doing it because that course actually requires an exam for the accreditation body. We're also planning to do it in one other course as well. So it's very small scale at this stage. Our friends in the registry want to also use it for students that miss exams, so we can avoid setting up centres for those who miss exams. One of the things I would say, though, with exams is, particularly within the things that I have purview on, still pushing people away from exams as much as possible, because I'm still not clear what an exam tests actually or proves in that regard. So we're doing it at the moment because it's necessary for the accreditation, but I'm nervous about the idea of online proctoring suddenly being a way for all of us to say, oh, I don't need to worry, I can just do an exam. And then we do all these online proctorings, but we're still in this same space of really questioning what is an exam trying to prove.
Can I ask a question back? Does anyone here undertaken, from a student perspective, an online exam, online test, an online quiz? Yeah. So what kind of Adam has? So what kind of actions were put in place to ensure that it was you and there was integrity? Adam, would you like? Because I think a number of people have experienced safeguards already elsewhere.
It was early days, and I thought, so many of us are fascinated by this whole world of learning, and yet few of us have learned in that way. So I put up my hand to say, could I be, like a student, and it was actually with one of the OUA offerings. And it was done in a similar sort of way with back cameras and front cameras and so on. And also some handwriting recognition software, which was done to test to see if it was legit. And it was pretty fascinating from that point of view. I was actually more interested in the questions, though, and how I was being assessed. Because I just wanted to get into that, the kind of verification stuff was essential. But actually I found that the questions were less interesting than the setup of the verification, if I may be so honest. So it goes to Nick's point about what the exam was for, rather than what the verification of identity was for. So
someone else like to share their experience?
This is really a question rather than a sharing of experience, because one of the things I know that concerns people about online exams is the integrity, but I just wanted to ask, what's the difference between an online exam and assessment which is done off campus, standard assessment? Because I think the integrity question doesn't just pertain to online exams, but online work more generally, and any work in the end that students, the buying of essays, how do we know that the person who puts it in is the person who did it? So I think that the question of integrity is actually bigger, and some of the things that people have talked about today, group work and so on, is probably our best sort of support for academic integrity, rather than fiddling with double cameras, and understand that you need them for some things.
Heather, would you like to comment?
We have academic integrity issues with all of our assignments as well, and we can actually, now that we've got those 23 assessment types in the course profile, we can analyse the semester data and work out where the biggest problems are with academic integrity breaches that have been found. I think, as I said this morning, there are some principles of assessment that go across the board no matter what you're doing, and designing assessment to try and minimise plagiarism is one approach. Using individual case studies so they can't just copy off their neighbour and that sort of thing. But it is a big issue. I think there are some programs that either have an accreditation requirement or have a necessity to demonstrate that the student can undertake certain tasks without the aid of resources. And that's when an exam kicks in. And I think with the online, we need obviously to authenticate the person who's doing the exam. That's the main reason for that. Anybody else want to say?
Just carrying on with the experience, I did the verified track, I think the verification track with a MOOC, which required keystroke identification and a photo ID. So there are people playing around in this space, but my belief is that this new era of online assessment demands that we design the assessment very carefully as much as we can, that it constructively aligns with what we're trying to achieve, and think about how it might connect with outcomes, whether they're career outcomes, what kinds of authentic assessment do we need to design. So where I was referring to the interns, where they co-construct an internship action plan in consultation with people in their site, each one is different and has to be different and co-constructed with somebody else. So it's not an issue whether it's submitted online, I do the inline marking and return it. So I think this new era of online assessment, the safeguards are important, and there are people playing around in that space as we are, but I think it demands us thinking very much about the design of our assessment around authentic assessment in particular.
Georgina, would you like to say something about the building on what Glenn has said about the authentic assessment, the alignment?
I think the only thing that I would add is that perhaps the use of online assessment is going to provide easier opportunities for us to individualise assessment, so that students are getting their own assessment. So that flexibility around assessment in online might be easier.
Thanks, Georgie. Question?
No, not really a comment. I was just going to say, but one of the things I noticed as listening to people was the examples where the students felt truly engaged. For example, in Kylie's class, in Don's example, and the one to do with sport development, and also all of those examples, the students felt engaged with what they were doing. They had some sense of ownership of what they were doing, and in some sense of control, in the sense that some were negotiating what topic they were going to do, so it's something that meant something to them personally. So I think in that sense, there's a lot less likelihood of them plagiarising or breaching academic integrity, because they actually have some ownership of what they're doing. They see the value in it and the personal value in what they're doing as well.
Coming back to the original question, I think in both the traditional and online type of assessments, if there are written assessments, we need to differentiate between plagiarism per se and the reduced ability of students used to nowadays technology to synthesize information and engage in critical thinking. And that may be an issue for us to consider individually on pages or degrees basis, whether we need to build in something into our foundation courses. Similar like the teamwork, we mostly assume that people get together and they will be effective in teamwork, like we assume they will have a baby and they will be effective parents. Yeah? And it doesn't always work, yeah? Or that there are pains with learning. And the same thing in terms of how to work with information, because the new generations have so much information at the fingertips. So there are several questions. One is, of course, how much to trust the information, because that's also part of the critical thinking, evaluate and compare from different sources, and then how to work with the information. And probably we have to teach them skills which we previously assumed they had.
These are interesting opportunities. Would the panel like to talk about these, further opportunities or any further challenges?
We're just currently in VBS looking at visas. So the kind of things that they're used in medicine and health in terms of doing it online and looking at different software. I know that for the MBA, we looked at a particular online one where synchronous, where you could check the person, make sure that it was actually this person that you were talking to. And it could be, we have to look at scalability, but that might be one way to ensure that it is that they have actually got this knowledge. And that might be where we do need something more traditional, that way might be a way forward.
Chris?
I was also going to say, one of the challenges is also going to be for us to adapt to some of those technologies. Sometimes some of our students already have adapted to a lot of the modern technologies in ways where they can pick up a lot of those critical knowledges without us. And so one of the things we need to be able to do is work out how we can achieve that as well and become part of that process. So in a sense of, and this is where I was talking about how that assessment design is so important, in that here we have an opportunity to allow students to participate in that learning process, in that assessment process, at the same time that we are. I know one of the discussions that was up there earlier mentioned how they hadn't, or that might have been yesterday, how they didn't know all of the things in that area. But as they were going through, the students were bringing things in, new ideas, new thoughts, which they were getting to learn from at the same time, and then building together a way to assess that and work with them, with the students to do that. And so the power of that course was enhanced significantly by the ability to allow the students to bring in a lot of the ideas and then the lecturer being able to adapt to that. And that's going to be one of those really significant challenges for us.
Thanks for that, Chris. I think one of the things that I'm noticing in online teaching, what it actually does, for me, what you're getting at there is the ability for us as scholars to connect in a different way with our students. And in that regard, my own experience with online is taking me in a place where I describe it as I'm going back to the future. In terms of, I am starting to feel like the time I spend with my students is not me, or I don't have to talk to them anymore, or talk at them, because all of that stuff is pre-recorded. And so actually my time with them is much more value add. I find it both enriching for myself, and I think I'm actually a better engager with them for it, because in the metaphor I have in my head is I'm in my cloistered room and I've got a small bunch of students that I'm talking to and actively engaging with. And so just to build on that, I think that's one of the things that digital enablement actually does for us in a whole manner of ways.
So just listening to people here and trying to join it up with some of the literature around this. There are 3 E's which go along with the assessment, and one is E-proficiency. So the expectation for us to be E-proficient and for our learners to be E-proficient. What does that actually mean? E-credibility was picked up, and E-credibility refers to the trustworthiness of the sources and the way in which we trust our learners and learners trust each other. So the E-credibility, I think, is something we have to not assume that young learners in particular, and I can talk of many examples in my interactions with young children, thinking that what they see on the screen is real and authentic. So the digital image of a volcano erupting in 1824, they think is real. The online pregnancy test, students sometimes need some convincing that this is not real. And there are many examples of this. So where people go in, our learners go in and use that secondary source as their primary source. In the OLT, I indicated to you, our most successful students use Wikipedia, but they won't use it in an assignment. And the more that they go through university, the more they use Wikipedia. So there's some hidden dimensions of how effective and successful students work. And the third one is e-designing. And I think this is a skill. So whether it's the e-portfolio you're developing, the way in which you design and create that is a new set of expectations. So the handwritten assignment I used to do, there wasn't too much leeway around how you designed the pencil and paper through primary school and secondary school. In fact, the copybook, the closer you were to being identical with everybody else, would get you the better mark. And if you could afford a typewriter in secondary school, well, that would tend to get you a better mark. So you might note that Bloom's taxonomy, the highest order thinking expectation, had been analysed, and it's now create. So those 3 things, I think, are things in our frame around e-assessment of e-proficiency, e-credibility and e-designing, which emerged from the literature and I think emerged from our reflections, discussions here.
I agree and support everything that the other panellists have said. But if you are designing assessment for e-assessment, I think, and we're getting back to our original question of what's been trending over the previous years, we're tending to a large degree to take our previous type of assessments and simply transfer them onto the electronic site. And I know I'm guilty of that in our last iteration of courses. Without kind of really thinking how can you use whole new tools and do a whole different assessment, new assessment, and that's where we've got to go and explore a little bit. We can't forget about some of our basic principles of reliability and validity. We've got to make sure that we collect enough data to make a valid decision of a student's performance, because we are ever increasingly at risk of appeals and more worryingly legal action as students spend more on their education and will fight to the bitter end over one of their grades. But I do think we haven't quite taken that step yet into a whole new area of assessment using whole new tools. And can I recommend in your books, in your packs, you've got Transforming Assessment by Jeff Crisp. And down the bottom of the front page is a link to Transforming Assessment, and you'll get in that site a whole lot of webinars on a really regular basis about whole new techniques and interesting things to do, and his handbook is quite an interesting read about that as well. So have a look at that when you get a chance. It's quite a thick one at the back of your pack. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. Lou, and may I just pose the last question, although I did see a question here. See.
I think that the crux is yet to come, that we are still scratching the surface because we are looking at how to design and redesign assessments so that they fit the new media, or that we can utilize it properly. And in terms of students, not always, but in most cases, we stop at engagement. My question is what is going to come in at 10, 20 years or maybe sooner, because their brains are being wired differently. And I went to a very interesting talk at the Queensland Brain Institute recently. They do fascinating work on attention and engagement. They have even test classroom, primary school and kindergarten, I believe in Melbourne, where they have little helmets so that they can see what's happening. And I started noticing in teaching, because the new generations are much more ambidextrous than we were. And that has to have an effect on how the neural synapses are shaped. So the next question, I think, going deeper to the core is how do they really learn, so that we design the assessments in a way that they can respond to that. And I don't think we have reached that point yet.
Thank you for the comment. Panellists, we're coming to the end of the forum, so I'd ask you, thinking about practical advice that you would give people to enable successful e-assessment that promotes student learning. So I'll start with Catherine and just work through just some quick words of wisdom. Yes, in a nutshell, if we can, because we know we're wanting to finish at 1.
Just a couple of things. One, don't do the emperor's new clothes. It's not the technology. It's not the technology. It's the assessment. It's the pedagogy of the assessment. So don't let the tool drive your assessment. And the other thing that is really, we must remember, and that's accessibility. And some of these technologies for assessment mean that they're going to exclude some students, and we're going to have to make special provisions. So just those couple of points.
Thank you. Chris?
I'd be thinking again about design, and it'd be think about what it is you really want the students to be able to achieve or do or demonstrate, and then try and work out a way to use that technology or whatever it is you're doing to make that happen, and at the same time keep it really simple. Because the biggest thing I note when I see a lot of these things is tasks that have way too much complication in what the student needs to do, and so they've got to go through too many hurdles just to be able to submit a piece of work.
Thank you. Georgie?
Probably the one thing that I would add, having worked with students and with staff, is that don't be afraid to try something. And drawing on what Glenn said about e-proficiency, you mightn't feel very e-proficient yourself. And the students are very good at using technology, very, very good at using technology. What I have found sometimes, though, is that they're not necessarily very good at using technology for learning. And so we can help them to develop those skills around using technology for learning, around creating their own knowledge, around knowledge construction, all of those different things. And I think in the same way that we can in the classroom, we can use technology to do that too.
Thank you. Nick?
My practical advice is, one of the things I ask myself is, what would I want to be assessed on if I did this course?
Thank you.
Yeah, I like the design lens and the agency to be given to the course convener and the program directors to think about how this is going to be designed in a way that the assessment of learning, summative, and the assessment for learning, the formative, enables these students to grow and develop and demonstrate the learning outcomes being designed. So in this new era of online assessment, to think about the rich range of evidence and the ways in which our students can demonstrate what they know and can do with what they know. And I think that's lined up with other people's. And if I can just highlight, I think there's great opportunities here around e-portfolios that people have mentioned, which did not exist before. So these are really opportunities. I think analytics, there's a big OLT project that ALF has been involved in. This is early days around how we use analytics, learning analytics, but I think there's great potential if the agency is with us around the use of those. Digital badges in higher education, there's also a big OLT project now completed by Beverly, Oliver and others around digital badges in higher education and how that might be ways in which our students can demonstrate. And the last one to highlight to you is computer marking of assignments. And I'm not confident and I'm not convinced, however, Stanley Rabinovich from ACARA, from the Australian Curriculum Assessment Reporting Authority, has a plan for NAPLAN persuasive text to be computer marked from 2017 onward. He can't convince English HOS that this can be done, but they're using human marking and then using that input, and he believes that from the trial, a report was produced just a little while ago, that the confidence level of the computer marking exceeds the human marking. I have to say I'm not convinced, but how good would that be if we were able to do that for persuasive text within our institution? So, who knows?
Thanks, Glenn. Don.
I wonder if there's any comparisons to be made between computer marking in the driverless car, which we're assured is going to be much, much better than letting us do that very dangerous thing. I think that I couldn't agree more with the other comments about the constructive alignment of assessment. You've got to be very, very clear about what it is that you're trying to get information about in an assessment item, and the richer the task, the better. Two other quick things. The horse has bolted in terms of the way our students have changed. Susan Greenfield's been writing for more than a decade about the rewiring of people's brains as a result of too much screen time. But that's just a part of it, so I think we just have to accept that that's what our students do. The other thing that I've found, and this is in terms of advice for people implementing e-assessment activities, the thing that students hate most of all about e-submission is if they've also got to traipse into the university and put in a hard copy. It completely escapes me why we persist in doing this, but overwhelmingly we do. So my advice to you is, as soon as you go digital, ditch hard copy. The students will love you for it.
Thanks, Don.
It's always a hard gig to come last on the list, and I support everybody else's comments. I guess my top ones would be alignment and really getting clear in your mind what you're trying to test and getting that very clear before you even start thinking about the methodology of the assessment. Hopefully when we look at e-assessment, I hope that we can put together through the e-assessment working party a good resource of examples with links to people who are using them. I think one of the benefits of days like today is the sharing of expertise, and people going, oh gee, so-and-so's using that, I'll definitely want to do that, I'll get in touch with them. So I think we need to do more about engaging academics in talking about assessment and setting up ways that we can exchange and share information and experiences with using new and different tools. And that's going to be essential for us all to move forward. And my last point would be pushing the fact that we should look at our assessment data. And it can be a simple look, it doesn't have to be a high-level analysis. But after you finish the marking, it's such a temptation to just go to the assessment board, put it in a cupboard, and they think that's done and on to the next semester. But really, if you sit down and do some very basic analyses of student performance, you can actually inform your teaching quite a bit. And I think many of us don't do enough in terms of analysing student performance data and question performance data as well.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for the panellists. Can we all congratulate them? And everyone, because I know I respect your time, I will invite the panellists to stay behind if there are any further questions. However, thank you so much for participating in today. We've enjoyed your company. We hope that you're taking some new information, new insights perhaps to embed into your own practice, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.